So thank you so much to Phyllis and to Sherry for having me here. I am thrilled to be here. This is a wonderful series, Women on Wednesdays, and it's so fun to talk about my work. So it's really a hoot. I'm excited to do it. I have a couple things I want to talk about in a sort of angle for this specific presentation, but I would love to be responsive to you guys. So at a point, if you have questions about things you'd like me to talk more about, because again, blabbering on for days about my own documentaries is thrilling. So first of all, I have done some different kinds of things. I went to film school, so I made a couple experimental films and narrative films, but documentary, feature-length narrative documentary is really what I consider my main work. So these are 3 films that meet those criteria. One is The Way North, and Phyllis did such a great job introducing me. I barely have to say anything. That was like half my presentation. No, I'm just kidding. But The Way North was my thesis at the University of Texas at Austin when I got my MFA, and I'll talk a little more about that. That's about North African immigrant women in the south of France in Marseille. And The Dressmakers is about clothes makers in Morocco. And so I sort of parlayed my work with The Way North into a Fulbright application, got a Fulbright, lived in Morocco for a year and made The Dressmakers. And then, since being here at East Tennessee State University, I've worked with Lee Bidgood and made Banjo Romantica, which is about Czech bluegrass musicians. So, I've talked about my work at different times and different places. I want to sort of talk about engagement, just as sort of an angle on some of this stuff. And in short, I think everyone should make documentary films because it's wonderful and amazing, and it's a great way to interact with and learn about the world. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some things I've done with students too, and then after talking about some of my films, talk a little bit about sort of what I think the engagement has meant to me. I really am passionate about making documentary films. I think as a form it's interesting. I think that teaching it can be a vital and profound method of learning about and engaging with the world. So I'm going to talk first. So again, these are the films I made. This is in Marseille, and Marseille is the south of France. And I had lived in Marseille before I even went to graduate school for a few months, really, because I wanted to learn some French. So I kind of created a DIY study abroad and lived there for a while. So when I went to graduate school in Texas, where immigration was a big story, I had Marseille on my mind because I thought this is an immigration story we haven't thought much about. And we still don't, although these days, because of current events, maybe a little more. But these are people from Algeria and Morocco, huge community in Marseille. They joke that it's like the first city of Africa in Marseille, even though it's the south of France, because it's just a huge, diverse, not just North Africans, but it's just hugely diverse, and tons of North Africans there. So I went there, and can talk about this more if you like, but it was kind of this crazy thing, this hubris of youth, where I went there and I thought, I'm going to make a documentary about North African immigrant women. Why? I mean, and why I think this is going to work is it's kind of a crazy idea because I didn't really know anybody, really built this from the ground up. Lots of people, like French students at the University of Texas at Austin, helped with some translating, helped make some connections for me. But one of the reasons I did is I was really interested in understanding this experience a little bit more. So again, I had lived in Marseille, and it was this interesting place with people from all over Italy, France, Senegal, North Africa. But I really wanted to spend some more time with some of these folks, and so met Fatima Razi. She is the main character, and she was the first female sports photographer in Morocco. And she runs a nonprofit for women in Marseille. And so after meeting her and working with her, I met the other main characters. There are really 3 characters. One is Ito and Haja. And one is a sans-papier, or a woman without papers, and the other married a French guy. She's of Moroccan descent, but she married a French guy. So these different immigration stories, and they are all part of Fatima's nonprofit. So basically wove those stories together. So 3 different perspectives. So I worked on this for a couple years and made a documentary about that. And I'm going to show you some clips, but this is the 3 characters from that film. And like I said, I had spent some time meeting these women who were from, 2 from Morocco, 1 from Algeria. And so I'd sort of been thinking about the region. Actually went to Morocco for about a week for The Way North and did some filming of Fatima's mother. And so I was able to put together a pretty strong Fulbright proposal saying I'd like to spend more time in Morocco. And Fatima does a million things. She's an amazing woman, but one of the things she did was to make these traditional clothes for women. So you can come get dressed up in clothes in her nonprofit and take a photo, and that was meaningful to a lot of the women. So anyway, that was kind of the first lead. I was interested in this sort of beautiful, interesting textiles, and so wanting to learn more about that. So got a Fulbright, spent a year living in Morocco, and when I was there, my original proposal was I'm going to talk about traditional clothes, and then I'm going to talk about ready to wear. So there's a huge manufacturing industry, especially in the north, like in Tangier, kind of like on our Mexican-American border. So lots of, especially young women, but working class folks will be working in factories making clothes for export. So that was the original story. It's an interesting story because, of course, we think a lot about China and other places doing textiles, but in places like Spain, they would want things turned around really quickly, and if Tangier's that close, they can turn around so quickly. You don't have to ship it across the world. So that was a really big part of the economy. So I was interested in those stories. But then, as happens with documentary, I met Salima Abdelwahab. And really, she became the main character. And what happened was she is a fashion designer. And I didn't really think fashion design, but I met her and basically connected with her. And she was making fashion for this fashion show in Casablanca. And that really became the main story. And so I still have these other stories, but partly it was access. So that's a whole other thing we could talk about. First semester, I basically do in a class I teach, because you can have an amazing idea, but you have to get in. And also, she's someone, frankly, I could relate to, and it's an interesting story, and I think ended up being something that seemed a little more surprising. Like why do we have to essentialize what it means to be Moroccan? She's a fashion designer creating new, fresh identity that doesn't meet stereotypes, and some of these designers and artists, want to put that forward, so she was kind of representing that. So it's almost like, has anyone seen Project Runway? It's almost like that, almost like that in a way. But so we see Salima making a line of clothes for this fashion show in Casablanca, and so that's the main story. And then you see Abdeslam Sabari, the middle guy, and he is making a wedding dress, so that's his trajectory. You see him making a wedding dress. And then Kinza Chafee really represents women working in the factories, but her story is just not as developed, and that's, again, I'm happy to talk about it as much as you like, but it's a really sensitive thing. It's tricky to tell stories about women working in factories, in part because women who are by themselves in the north of Morocco, it's not seen as a very good thing for their families to be living by themselves. So they're a little shy. There was some language thing. So I talked to quite a few people filmed in factories, which wouldn't be easy to do here, but to really develop the relationship as I wanted to didn't quite work out. And I was there for a year, which is a long time. But again, when you think about building it from the ground up, I speak some French and Spanish. My Arabic is shwish, like very little. So for example, with Abdeslam, I spent time shooting with just me by myself with him, speaking a little Arabic, but a lot of it's like watching stuff, and sometimes it's like, but I have no idea what he's saying, and later on translate. But the first time I went, I had a friend who spoke Arabic, and he said, this is what she wants to do. You sure that's cool? You sure that's all right? And he said yes. So all this was great. Working with all these people was wonderful and interesting. And again, it was like things that maybe I'd only experienced through documentary films, but wanting to actually be there and like listen to people and see their spaces. And I'll talk a little more about this later. But Abdeslam is interesting. He's the everyman, and so the Moroccan clothes, there's a high end even within this world. But every Moroccan owns a kaftan or a jalaba, if you're a woman or a man. Everybody. So he makes everybody, rich or poor, one of those. His clientele is going to be more. The everyman, this tiny space that he works in. And my sense, or my understanding is that in other parts of the Arab world, it's similar, where they'll work in these little spaces and churn this stuff out. But just to really spend day in, day out, several days with him, many days with him, shooting and spending time with him, to be in that space with him is fascinating. Hopefully communicating something about him and the work that he does to the world. The other thing I felt, like I had these ostensible stories and trajectories in the course of the documentary that are woven together, but also I'm always thinking, of course, about, and maybe it's not obvious, but probably to this crowd it is, that I'm always thinking about class and race and gender. And so Salima Abdelwahab is a woman in Morocco, but she's also from a different class and has different access and privileges than Abdeslam Sabari, who really comes from rural, small Morocco. We visited him, and that's a whole story I could tell you about visiting his family, which is really interesting. And versus, some of the people who are working in factories. So different kinds of privilege and access, varying because of different factors. So I mentioned working with Salima and how she was fantastic to work with. she has this, so we spent most of our time in Morocco living in Tangier, and outside of Tangier, she has a little place in the country, and spent a lot of time in her atelier watching her make clothes. And then they did this fashion show in Casablanca, and they did it at this old church. It was kind of interesting. And that's one of her outfits. And like I said, the dressmaker is long. It's about an hour long, so I wouldn't even show it to you. But this is a smoking jacket, which if you know anything about it, besides the fact like women living by themselves, to work at a factory is tricky for a family, but smoking is a big faux pas, huge faux pas. Women wouldn't do it unless you're an expat or if you're a sex worker. Basically, smoking is just not done. So for this designer to make a smoking jacket, which is what this is pretty edgy. So, and also you get a sense right away of what her clothes are like. She's really doing interesting things with fashion, mixing European ideas and whatever that means, some Moroccan ideas. So this is just some other images from that documentary, and like I said, we were in factories. This is a shot of Casablanca. These are things Absalam uses as trim on the jalabas and kaftans, and this is the first shot of the dressmakers where they're filming the Central Market. So they have some photographers doing photographs of these models, Spanish models in fact, wearing these clothes, and they throw flowers on them and take pictures, and there's fruit and vegetables and people watching, and that's me shooting, filming. So jumping into Banjo Romantica, quite a different kind of project, and one of the great things about this project was working with Lee Bidgood. And these other two projects I had worked, gone there and not known anything really, and just started meeting people. So nothing's ever easy, but certainly compared to that, to working in a place where there are 3 languages and one that I barely speak. Working with Lee, who'd been working on this, he's a young guy about my age, so, and he's been studying this stuff for 10, 15 years. Is really probably the world's expert on Czech bluegrass. I'll just say that, I'm not sure if that's true, but he's up there, that's for sure. So he had been working on this stuff. We went and made a documentary, and we did it, if you haven't heard about it, it's all we've talked about around here for 2 years, so I'd be surprised if you haven't. But anyway, we just showed it on PBS, and it showed in about 70% of the PBS stations nationwide, so we're really excited about that. It's a great chance to get ETSU's name out, and this is totally an ETSU production, so we're really proud of making this film with these resources. Martin Walters, who's in music and radio TV film, did the mix, he did the sound mix. Several students worked on it. John Hounshell did the poster, which is, I think, just gorgeous. And just lots of other ETSU things. So we went to Czech Republic and slept on couches of people we knew. Some of the people in the documentary drove us around, and in a remarkably small amount of time, in about 4 or 5 days, shot the entire thing. So the other thing about the way I work is partly because I always feel like I'm learning. I like to shoot a lot, and I like to spend a lot of time with people, partly to build relationships and trust, but I also I like to see people over time. That's what I really love. There are different kinds of films, one of the things I love. So with this, we did not do that. So everything has positives and negatives. Positives, my editing was a lot less work because you just didn't have that many choices. So that was great, and then we did a couple other shoots here in town. But I would say it's similar to the other work that I think, when you're a filmmaker, you have certain things you're always interested in, and you're always seeing certain kinds of things. So kind of the way I shoot scenes is similar, but it had the efficiency of limited time, limited money, and so I had to make something relatively quickly. Also, I am interested in women characters. I'm attracted to that. I always sort of want to find and tell women's stories, and this was not the case. So these are mostly men. The one thing I'll say is the couple, the wives of a couple characters make appearances here, and so maybe I contribute that a little bit, at least to get a little sense of them, but really these are mostly men playing this. Ruth Ellen Gruber is one of the experts in the story, but really it's a pretty male world. And similar, so the sort of most complete structure, I would say, of my 3 films is The Dressmakers, because there's an event that you get to follow and to its conclusion, and you can weave stuff more easily and have it work. This is a more episodic, so we meet these different characters, but we see them for a little bit. We see another character, we see another character. There's always a million ways to make a film, sometimes, dependent on the circumstances. And our circumstances, as I already mentioned, were we had 4 days, no money, so we made it about these different characters. But, what's nice is we still, I think you can tell right away, it's a really rich, visual, interesting world, a lot of texture. So we got to see Marko Čermák, who is also the guy on the poster, but the grandfather of Czech bluegrass music at his little cabin in the woods, and the banjo maker, got to see him making and playing banjos with his family. Any general comments or questions so far about anything?
I have one. You mentioned editing for a project like The Dressmakers that was filming and relationships for a year versus the 4 days in the Czech Republic. So what's your process for editing? I mean, how do you even start to cut when you have that much raw footage that you're working with? I mean, what's the process for that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So this is sort of what I recommend to students too is, when you've shot that much footage, like I shot at least 100 hours for The Dressmaker, a crazy amount of stuff, which again, I wouldn't even really advise that because that's a lot, but partly, you're learning when you're shooting stuff and things do happen where you have something that you didn't necessarily plan on you want. But usually what I do is I take a lot of footage and then start working on scenes and then sequences. And then you put those sequences together to make the film. But I think the first editing is really messy. It's just about saying, we shot for, Salima's making work for a fashion show. We shot for a day when she was talking to everybody about what they were gonna make. And so turn that day of, let's say you shot 5 hours, turn that into 30 minutes. So you take all that footage and partly just thinking about, what stood out in your head, but also thinking about what do you need to know? Like, it's day one. You might start with some of the things that are really obvious and maybe not even interesting, but it's day one. Today we're gonna make a kaftan. And then starting to start with 30 minutes. And then when you line it up, my first cut was probably 5 hours, which no one wants to watch. But you start there and then you start to think about what your story is. So, editing, again, everyone should make documentaries. You should all make documentaries, but editing is like writing. So you have to start dealing with the work, and it's not even taking shape until you start to move things around. So you don't want to edit too much too early, but you really, it's always editing. When you're shooting, you're editing. Still seeing strange. So anyway, does that?
Yeah. So do you leave things in for the audience that maybe for yourself you would take out, but for the audience to follow, you put back in?
Yeah, and you're always doing that because, it's true. There are things that when you're looking at this stuff so much, you get absolutely bored by, but you have to find that right balance, And I'm not sure there's anyone who would say you absolutely ever totally know. You're trying and showing it to people sometimes, editing, showing rough cuts, and trying to get a cut that finds that right balance, not being too obvious, but answering questions, because confusion is like not good, And so something like this too, I think it's a rather specialized audience, so there are things that a lot of people don't know. After making these films, it's, of course I believe in the process, like I said earlier, so we've done a number of things with classes where they have made documentary films, and we've done different kinds of collaborations. So for example, we did a Rethinking Water and a Rethinking Food for the School of Public Health, and students made documentaries about those ideas. We also have students do projects for El Nuevo, the bilingual site in the journalism department. Ines has been part of that. And I just think it's a great way for students because you can talk about issues, be engaged in issues, and really think and practice listening and thinking and observing in a way that's really meaningful, besides all the other virtues of the discipline, like multimedia. So I think it's a great way to get students engaged in things without even necessarily realizing it, to think differently about ideas without even realizing it. And I have had students before say, but I do not agree with what this person is saying. I do not like this, and it kind of at least makes them have to listen and consider what the person is saying. So I think it's really valuable. And I do find that students really, it's appealing to students, not everybody, but students really like the multimedia. They like interacting with the media this way. So when I think about some of my work and sort of what some of the engagement has meant to me, I think that it has forced me to be more humble. I think I have had some of the experiences I wanted to have. I was able to understand people's experiences differently, like sitting in this space with Absalam, where he's making the dresses, all day long, and the team of 5 people sitting there all day long. And they're still so generous. So to work with people who are, working in that situation and have them be so generous to me, like they said, you're working hard. My students don't even say that. They don't even, but they say, you're working too, or they would bring me coffee. And Moroccans are also just very generous. And there was a time where we went and saw where he lived, and of course as a filmmaker, really difficult, like small space, dense space. It was a little bit like I knew that he was not a rich guy because he was doing this work all day, but to go to his space was, it was hard in a way. I thought this is a difficult life. Hey, again. And of course, as a filmmaker, you think that would be interesting to understand him, but respecting that he's going to have limits about what he wants to show. So I think I think that I've gotten a lot of things from that as well, just from engaging in that way with people and their stories. The other thing for me that I think I've gotten from engaging in this way with these stories and these projects is I certainly think like people my age, or maybe everybody, we can be ironic, or we can be sarcastic, or we can be clever, and I think all those things have their places. What? All the above. And it's not that those things are great, but when I felt, especially like I think of someone like Absalom, when he's welcoming me and trusting me, I sort of felt like I could not even table those things anymore. It's like I felt so much imperative to be honest and sincere. And there were times where I felt shocked by things like seeing where he lived and sort of the density of his little place in this urban Tangier. But it sort of cured me of some of that stuff, I would say, because I just didn't feel like I could be honest with people, and then my work, could be honest if I wasn't being sort of honest and also not judgmental. And I think sometimes, when you're starting out, or it will almost be trendy or cool to go like see something else, the other, and you feel like you're cool because you're seeing something different. And it just really cured me of that, because I first of all felt humbled by their generosity and also just willingness to work with me, and also just a real responsibility to these people. So, I think, I see this also when I was in France. We watch stuff in the media and we think we understand. And people told me things about America, and I was like, well, I'm not sure that's the whole story. So, certainly we have that of other people. And I think the actual making of the media really can be transcendent in that way. And we hope that there is something that isn't quite cliche, and we hope that when we're making something that it just invite people in a different way, and that's an ongoing discussion about times and ways that the medium is successful or fails. But certainly I think for me those have been some really meaningful things to me that I think can be meaningful for other people, whether or not they dedicate their entire lives to this work. So I recommend it. Come make a film, send your students, watch lots of them. It's a really exciting medium. If we have a chance, if this works, I'll show a couple of clips. Otherwise, I apologize for the problems, and I have some things online, and there are plenty of opportunities to show stuff. I don't know how you couldn't have not watched Banda Romantica. Lucky you. No, I'm just kidding, because we've been showing it everywhere. But certainly there are other screenings and opportunities to see the stuff. So thanks so much again for your interest. I'm happy to answer a couple questions, and if this works out, we'll do this too. Otherwise, maybe we'll do it another time. Just the clips. Thank you.
Shara, you mentioned Selena's fashion, making the smoking jacket that's like a faux pas because of the male gender. Did you yourself experience even difficulty, or just a sense of you're not wanted because of being a female filmmaker in Morocco? Was there some at first, or even, I'm guessing they were okay once you were filming, in the beginning, a sense of you're a woman, you can't do this, you're not allowed, or those kind of
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say Saleema's very hip, not from her. She got it. She's a creative person who's lived in different countries and saw me as another creative person, really appreciate what I was doing, and also saw how it might be useful to her. It's had such limited distribution that I'm not sure it's been very useful to her. But not with her. I think one thing, I spent a year there, which is a long time, but for a really complicated, complex place, it's not a long time. And I would say that I think the gender relationship is interesting. I never felt like the men in that shop didn't trust me or like me or believe me as a filmmaker, but I did feel like I was aware of, there's a power differential because I have a camera. It's hard even to explain, even in English, what this independent documentary means. Like, what's going to happen to this? Maybe almost nothing. Maybe it'll be on the web, everyone will see it. So it's hard to describe like what this really means, so that it's almost like, is this false hope in a way, that this is going to be something else? It will never make money. Right. But so a little bit of a power just because of having that camera, and that there was something that it's different for them to have a woman in the space working like that. Other women were not in that space like that. So, but what exactly that was, I can't say exactly. So never rejection as a filmmaker, never not taking me seriously. They knew that I had a husband and he was around, and I wouldn't have wanted to be misleading in any other way about why I was there or interest. And I think that, their perception of foreigners sometimes can be complicated. It's a good question. And not with anybody else.
I have a question about, so say you made a documentary, and so this is in some ways a distribution question too, right? It's hard to get You know, not everybody goes to Sundance and gets the big contract.
Right, definitely,
Obviously,
definitely.
Very few people do.
Yeah.
But if a documentary, yours or anybody else's, gets really big, do the people who are in it benefit at all?
That's a good question, and different filmmakers deal with this differently. There's also kind of interesting discussion about whether or not to pay people involved in your film, and some people say never, I would never do it, and some people say I should pay them, they're helping me out, that kind of thing.
It's a difficult question.
Difficult question, yeah. And in terms of films making money, it's just so unlikely. Like I think of the filmmakers that actually make money, documentary filmmakers especially. I think of the really big people, like Michael Moore. I don't know if they would give money back to the people that are ever involved. You know, you're paying for all kinds of things. So like once you're dealing with distribution, if there's anything you don't own, you have to pay for it. But again, some of that money is going to go to the same big people. So like Banjo Romantica, for example, we had some music in the first version that we did that we could have paid like $1,000 just for this little tiny lick to have it in there. We said that's a huge part of our little budget, so we took it out. But that money would have gone to these recording artists that are already like there's a little tiny Rolling Stones song. They don't need more money. You know, we're just an independent filmmaker, but that's what you have to do if you're going to be clean and legit. So just to say, I think that's probably pretty uncommon for anyone in a film to make money from it. And I'm not sure, and I don't know beyond that. I mean, I think like if they were paid to do speaking engagements, something like that perhaps. Certainly there are other ways that publicity could help somebody's business or entity, but it's not that common.
Is it purposeful that you choose international subjects more than domestic? And I mean, have you done stuff over here stateside, I assume?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it started out as my interest, because I had lived in Marseille and I wanted to spend more time there. And I'm certainly interested in, I did work for a documentary when I was living in San Francisco before I went to grad school about declining marine fisheries, and actually got to go to the fish market in Madrid at like 5 in the morning, which is like one of the biggest fish markets in the world. So at the time, that was when I was young, like one of my dreams, like international documentaries. So in a way, it's kind of playing that out, but I would also say there's a way that like when you can have a crazy idea as I did, but when you're over there and you've got a camera, that's what you're there to do, so you better do it. And I've done some other things, like for film school, I made a little, like my first film that wasn't good, but I made about Texas sumo wrestlers. So little things like that. But and I actually shot a bunch of footage of this Dougherty sculpture when they built this on campus that I still have to edit. So so just to say, some of it I think is definitely my interest, and some of it is I found it a good way to kind of tether me down and make me actually commit to something. Because like I said, once you're there and you spend all that effort, you better finish it. I, like many of us, am interested in a lot of things. I think a lot of filmmakers are, so sometimes it's just like a question of tying yourself down and making yourself finish it. So I do find that puts a little more pressure. I am thinking about local stories now, though, trying to develop something local, partly just situational because I have little kids now. And so dragging them along, and they're not quite big enough to drag along to other places, so.
So do you have a new project that you just started?
Along with finishing editing together the Dougherty stuff, which is going to be beautiful footage, I have some ideas that I wouldn't mind talking about, but maybe not so publicly. But yeah, I have some ideas, like a local one, and this one I don't mind talking because it's so vague, but I proposed a project in Montreal, actually, about the North African community there, because there's a huge North African community, and that is somewhere I could drag my kids, because it's close enough. It's not so far. And so I have a couple ideas. It always takes these things a long time to develop, so, and because I like it that way, I like to spend time developing them.
Does it ever evolve from what you originally set out to do? It sounds like when you meet people, it changes the way that the film might come, but have you ever set out to do something, meet some people that totally change the direction you're going?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that happened with Salima. I wouldn't have said fashion design in Morocco. So definitely, and I think that's it's a good balance between having your idea, but you definitely want to be responsive to the film. When I teach documentary, there are different kinds of documentaries, and there are scripted things where people say, this is what I'm going to make, I'm going to get funded, and you really script it up. But that's not that common, especially the kind of filmmaking I like, which is, I don't want to know the answer. Like, I want to spend time with people, and I want to kind of be able to follow things or respond to things. Anything else? Yes.
So you talked about the language barriers and the problems with meeting new people in Morocco. How did you go about doing that?
Meeting people in Morocco? Yeah, it's like a long story because there were a million connections, but one of the things I did is I started with this nonprofit So I said, would you back me up and help me with this Fulbright application? They said yes. So I started there, met them, actually filmed them a little bit in Casablanca. And then they had an office in Tangier, so spent time with them. Also started with anybody that I knew. So with the Fulbright, actually, there were some good connections. So I connected with people in Tangier, which was a really good place for especially the manufacturing story. My husband ended up working at a school, and he knew somebody who owned a factory. So he said, can we come to your factory? He let us come to his factory. When we landed in Tangier, one of the challenges among many is that it's not like an email place, like people aren't emailing. Partly it's that everyone doesn't email, but also it's just more of like, hey, you know somebody? Okay. So when we kind of got our feet grounded a little in Tangier, like friends would put us in touch. There was a really charming, talented Spanish filmmaker who was there, and he said, oh yeah, this guy will show you his factory. And Friends of Salima's had a factory. So anyway, all these different ways, a million things. Like the web of connections is complicated and vast, and really, I was desperate, and not desperate, but I kind of, so I was like working anything I could. Anyone who would talk to me, I would go talk to them. Didn't all make it in the film, but it was interesting. So one of the Tangier, besides everyone should make documentaries, everyone should go to Tangier because it's amazing. And they have
documentaries in Tangier.
Yeah, do that. Everyone should do that. So there's this Cinematheque. Tangier is amazing. If you don't know anything about it, it's again it was an international city. When you watch Casablanca, it's probably based more on a place like Tangier. There was a time where it was interzone. It didn't belong to anybody, and just has always had international artists and people from all over. And also has that little bit of that seedy, border city thing. But there's also really cool artists there who, her name is Ito Barada, and she's a filmmaker artist who spent a bunch of time in France, quite accomplished. She comes from a wealthy Moroccan family, but started a Cinematheque de Tanger, and it's like the first North African art house cinema. So it's this beautiful old, used to be like a Bollywood cinema where what I heard is guys would go and chain smoke and watch Bollywood films. So she took it over with this great kind of San Francisco thrift store aesthetic, redid it. It's this beautiful space, and there are quite a lot of creative people that will congregate around there. So they'll help local filmmakers. They help me out. And so when we made the film, The Dressmakers, I went back twice to show it, one at a conference that was there in Tangier, and once at that Cinematheque. And that was pretty cool because I'm not like Coppola or I'm a little tiny filmmaker in a big world. But we showed it in the screen, and all the guys at the clothes makers came. So that was super exciting. And again, my way of communicating with them is they don't email. I think someone's my Facebook friend, but I went I hope they're still here at this, at this little booth up on the 4th floor, and some of them were, and I went and said, hey, I'm back. And they're like, you don't call? And I'm like, it's really hard to call because I speak 5 words of Arabic. But anyway, I told them, come to the screening, and a bunch of them came. That was really super fun and satisfying. So long answer to short question, which is that a million things. I spent that whole year just working any angle I could all the time. And then, when things couldn't follow up, when I could develop something that I did. But yeah, it's true. It's, I'm grateful because you don't make anything, none of us do anything maybe without the help of others. Certainly this is a great example of that because a million people help me. And, I feel bad because it's hard to totally communicate with some of these people because I'm not hiding things. But again, I have the number scratched out of a girl from the factory that I filmed an interview with, and I did my best to go back, but it's just, so anyway. Yeah.
When you're making a film, is it ethical to go back and show the main characters the film before you actually publish it? Is this the light that you want to portray it?
It's a great question. You should come take that class, as you'd have really interesting things to say. But yeah, because again, people think differently about it. So some people say, I do not want to, put anything out that the people don't agree with, or that I don't want them to be surprised or offended. Some people say this is a film about that person. They gave me consent, and you really shouldn't make anything before you have consent because. There is a power differential. There are people who have been misrepresented forever, or they just, wouldn't have means to speak for themselves. So you have to be careful about that, certainly. But the guys at Enron are in a different position. You're not going to ask everybody. Sometimes you have to tell a truth that people don't want to hear. And so I've heard it in one sort of ethics of documentary filmmaking put like that. It's a power question. So that's, a lot of the stuff is really subjective, and it's exciting and scary at the same time. But exciting that the medium is so flexible, but scary because, we have to be thinking all the time, really, and arguing. I always talk about Werner Herzog, who's a filmmaker I love, but he does things that a lot of people would really find unethical. So, when we are talking in class or when I'm thinking, you really have to think about my own work, think about who you are as a filmmaker, and sometimes argue and sometimes say, this is not okay. So another example of that is there was I'm forgetting the name of it. Ines, do you remember the documentary about it was a civil rights period piece, and they had some reenactments in it. I forget what it's called, but so they had these reenactments that were gorgeous, but they weren't indicated as reenactments, but beautifully shot, super fun. Kids jumping out of the window is when all the kids left school to protest, but they didn't indicate it, and I would call that unethical. It's like there are all kinds of things you can do with documentary film because it's not journalism, it's not the news report, but I think you have a responsibility to indicate that. So they ended up responding to that feedback, and they made an announcement at the beginning of the film, but whether or not you have to tell people that is something that you and I might see differently.
So does that mean that unlike journalism, you're shooting journalism, you can't set the scene? So does that mean that you would consider it unethical to set up the scene, to set up his house and kind of reconfigure it so it looks a certain way, to make it more closed, or to shoot it to make it look bigger? Because that seems like a prerogative, and so where is the line on your vision versus, hey!
Okay, hey, we get to watch something.
Discount. T'achètes. Bonjour. Oui, tu veux lui dire quelque chose, tu lui dis.
Je dis quoi? Comment ça?
Bah dis-lui quelque chose, je sais pas. Non, pas comme ça.
Mais on va passer à la télé. Bonjour, je suis là. Vous avez
oui, mais dis quelque chose d'intelligent.
Comment ça?
Je sais pas.
Eh bien, bienvenue à Marseille.
Voilà.
Et bonne année. Au revoir.
Comment on peut définir Marseille? Marseille, c'est une ville qui ressemble à aucune autre. Dans la même rue, tu peux trouver des noirs, des blancs, des jaunes, des rouges, enfin, tu en trouves de tout. L'exclusion existe, mais elle n'est pas à ciel ouvert. On croit toujours que, comme ils disent en France, que l'herbe, elle est plus verte ailleurs. Donc tu te dis, oui, mais en France, ça sera encore meilleur. Alors que non. Et donc, moi, c'est tout de suite, j'ai commencé à chercher du travail. Et je me disais, je suis photographe, j'ai mon matériel et tout, ça va aller vite. Parce qu'au Maroc, c'était difficile, parce que j'étais une femme. Mais je me suis dit, en Europe, ça va être plus facile, parce que c'est le pays des libertés, etc. C'était pas du tout ça. C'était aussi difficile pour les femmes ici que là-bas, parce que la photo, c'était un milieu d'hommes. En plus de ça, moi, j'avais un problème, c'est que j'étais photographe femme, ok, mais j'étais arabe, j'étais basanée et j'étais frisée. Donc, c'est 3 fois plus difficile pour moi que pour les autres.
Anyway, I think we're just about out of time, so I'm happy to answer other questions. We have, I was going to show the first couple minutes of Banja Romantica, but the Way North, the little teaser I've got of that is on my website. So if you go to lightprojectsfilms.com, you can see the first kind of 5 minutes of that. And thanks again. Thank you.